Hello and welcome to Election 2021 Question Time. In this edition, we feature the candidates looking to represent the constituency of Garff. Joining me on the panel are, in alphabetical order, Daphne Kane, Martin Perkins, Andrew Smith, Jamie Smith, and Gareth Young. Following the general election on September the 23rd, two of them will be elected to the House of Keys. And before we start with questions, we're giving each candidate up to 2 minutes to introduce themselves. And first up, we have Daphne Kane. Daphne.
Thank you. Hello. I'm Daphne Kane, and I'm seeking to be re-elected to the constituency of Garff, having served 5 years. I hope my track record will speak for itself, and that I've delivered on the manifesto pledges of making a positive difference. I have lived in the constituency for 25 years. I was raised in Sheffield, trained as a journalist, and first came to the island in 1989 to work as a journalist. After that, I worked in PR and communications roles and customer service manager within Isle government in various different departments. In the 5 years that I've been elected, I have focused on education, the economy, the environment particularly, and also infrastructure, and they are very much still the priorities going forward. I've outlined in my manifesto in greater detail, but I think particularly of importance in the constituency, we have the need desperately to stop pumping out raw sewage to Laxey Bay. We need a sewage treatment pump away option that best serves visitors and residents. We need better infrastructure around, including seawall and flood defences, so that we don't have a repeat of the October 1st flood of 2019. I'm also very keen that we celebrate our biosphere, our rewilding, protecting biodiversity, and also putting investment both into well-being, mental health, and the culture and heritage of the Isle of Man also. And I hope that if your views chime with mine, that you might feel able to support me when the general election on the 23rd of September. Thank you.
Thank you, Daphne. Martin Perkins.
Thank you, Richard. I've also been the Garff MHK with Daphne for the last 5 years and experienced government, the parts that work and, more importantly, the parts that don't work. Tynwald is not a public limited company maximising share value for its shareholders, but it is a service provider and it should provide services to us all. My focus is on a politically stable, independent island that provides services and opportunities for all. To achieve this, we have to get the economy back on track, as COVID has left us with a big black hole which to fill. My number one priority is attracting new business that generates wealth and creates diverse opportunity for us all. The health service must be kept free at the point of delivery. The availability of GP appointments and long waiting times for operations urgently need addressing. Community hubs are offering public access to services may well be part of the answer, and not just the health service, other things the public require as well. The treatment of post-viral illnesses and the prescription of cannabinoids should be kept high on the agenda. Our island must be kept a desirable place in which to live, to work and to visit. A place with a healthy, sustainable environment where young people have opportunities and those who have gone away to university wish to return to the island to play their part. Preschool nursery education should be free. Importantly, housing and first-time buyer schemes should be addressed urgently because they are really hampering our island's development. The climate change bill that has been approved by Tynwald has an obligation to achieve carbon reduction targets that we must meet. The cost of this must be proportionate and fair, not just falling on those that can afford it. The discharge of sewage in Laxey Bay is simply not acceptable and needs resolving urgently. Brexit and COVID have given us a lot of legislation that we need to catch up on. And with your support, I hope to be able to achieve that in the next administration. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew Smith.
Thank you, Richard. Good evening. I'm Andrew Smith, an independent candidate standing for the constituency of Garff. I freely relocated to the island with my wife and 2 daughters with employment in 1986 and chose to live in Laxey. My employment history has been in accountancy, working in all sectors: agricultural, banking, construction, fund management, insurance, oil and gas, shipping and yacht and aircraft industries. I am now semi-retired. I am not new to Manx politics, as I served on the board of Laxey Commissioners between 1992 and 2001, and I also stood for election in Garff in 1995 and 2016. I've also worked in the Isle of Man Government Treasury between 1997 and 2008, where my role involved promoting the Isle of Man financial services industry within the UK and beyond. Consequently, I have had interaction with politicians in Westminster, Brussels, the Middle East, Far East and Australasia. I rescued Laxey Fair from failure in 1999 and have since been the principal organiser. Since 2006, I have had a business interest in Fairy Cottage Filling Station Laxey and recently formed a strategic business alliance with Island Fuels. Following the serious flooding in Laxey in 2019, I formed the Garff Flood Action Association. From the major incident being declared, this association became active and continually monitors flooding incidents throughout Garff, collating and disseminating relevant information both to central and local government and also the wider community. I have always had and continue to have a commitment and passion for Garff and the island, and this is well documented on public record. I am competent, conscientious and caring, with a dedication, passion and resolve to assist our island nation and its resilient people to work towards a brighter hope for the future. I am a solutions person, definitely no one's messenger, but the delivery man.
Thank you, Andrew. Jamie Smith.
Hi, I'm Jamie Smith. I work full-time in the private sector and I'm also currently a Garff Commissioner. On the doorstep I see 4 issues, excuse me. On the doorstep I'm hearing 4 issues that I'd like to express now, and they are the major overrun and overspend of large projects, the state of the roads, including speeding and potholes and many other aspects, climate change, which includes the flooding aspect, and the lack of availability of affordable housing. If given the opportunity to get my teeth into these things, then what I would like to do, or see done, is I'd like to see the acceleration of the formation of a capital projects team, which included experts in writing watertight contracts with overrun penalties, and see more accountability where there are failings. As far as the roads are concerned, I'd like to see a highways minister appointed who is the voice in government for roads and all the road users of the different types. As far as climate change is concerned, I think there should be a 2-pronged attack. I think we should do some short-term, right-now things like public buildings should have solar panels on. We should be encouraging bus travel, possibly free for under 22s. The buses should be electric. And the local governments, local authorities should be working together with their recycling initiatives. And longer term, we need to plan for the replacement of our fossil-fueled power stations. And on the housing, I think that a good fit for the Isle of Man would be a housing association, a not-for-profit, government-run organisation where you buy that part of the house that you can afford. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. And finally, Gareth Young.
Thank you, Richard. So I'm Gareth Young and I'm standing in the Garff constituency for this month's general election. I'm standing on 4 key areas. Educational opportunities, where we foster our new generation of talent and where we really encourage them into the workplace in order to make a really good contribution to our society. Social issues, where we have a lack of affordable housing, where we have people living in substandard housing and need to be brought into the 21st century with their housing and with their different issues, and allow people to actually then become a proper contributing member to society. Economy and poverty. We do suffer from real world poverty on the Isle of Man. We have people who earn far below the living wage and really struggle to make ends meet on a day-to-day basis. And we need to start moving people from earning minimum wages into living wages, and so that they can then spend more in the economy and actually then contribute on a wider scale. And health and well-being. Everybody should have access to free healthcare. Everybody should have access to high-quality healthcare, and we shouldn't have a waiting list that is essentially 30,000 appointments behind schedule. And we need to work on these issues together to drive the island forward. Now, I'm a teacher. I've been a long-standing teacher on the Isle of Man. I've worked here as a teacher for 14 years, and I sit on the front line of an essential service. And I see the issues day to day. I've lived the issues myself, and I can really work in order to combat those issues with the help of everybody around. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So first up, since 2016, the Manx public has seen demand for food banks grow, rising levels of homelessness, nearly 10% of households now being fuel poor, and the Select Committee of Tynwald on Poverty state that income support and job seekers allowance are simply not enough to live on. Meanwhile, the Manx public has also seen its government deliver increased delays and costs in the millions of pounds for the Douglas Promenade and Liverpool landing stage projects, a 3-year period without water slides at the NSC, hundreds more staff and consultants on the public sector payroll, and even now a Manx taxpayer-sponsored esports team. So 2 parts to the question. Do you think that the credibility divide between politicians, senior civil servants and the Manx public has ever been greater? And if elected, what will you do to improve accountability to ensure the Manx public gets better services and better value for money? Gareth Young?
So when we talk about the government overspend and the large projects, we genuinely don't see people actively engaging in combating overruns. We see project managers that don't operate burn lists. We see people that just go back and forward to Tynwald asking for more money for projects and it just being quite happily granted. And at that point there really needs to be some serious questions asked of those executives as to why they are having those overruns and what should be done by those executives in order to combat those overruns. Does there need to be a penalty for contractors that aren't meeting the terms of the contract? Do we need proper airtight contracts to actually be drawn up with the contractors and with those trades? We need to do all those things, and we need to have proper scrutiny. In terms of what I would like to see, I'd like to see politicians actually scrutinise the legislation, actually scrutinise the contracts, and make sure that those executives that work with them are held to account on it.
Thank you. Martin Perkins?
I think just picking up on Gareth's point about politicians scrutinising the contracts, it's very difficult because if we take the promenade, for example, there were so many unknown variables within that project that this is the reason why it's overrun and why it's got on over budget. And it's very difficult to hold people to account. And the way we do it at the moment is by having a select committee look into it, which is too late. We've got to have politicians in there at the front holding people to account in all departments and all things that are going on, actually with their sleeves rolled up, being responsible for it, and also the ministers. Now, regarding the food banks, it is a particularly difficult one because people don't see it, but there are many, many homeless sofa surfing around the island. And I believe that we have to get our benefits correct because quite often the people are better off on benefits than they are actually working. And it should be a sliding scale and not a cliff edge to encourage them back into work. And we should give training opportunities and housing opportunities for these people to encourage them to take an active part in society.
Thank you. Do you think some aspects of the failures of the promenade were down to politicians getting actively involved in the planning?
There was a committee that I don't think helped that much, that was ongoing and insisted that certain parts of the promenade were kept open, which from an engineer's point of view is very difficult to keep certain areas when you've got materials coming in from all directions. Plus the fact of COVID, of course, but that's being used as an excuse for everything at the moment. But it's... Basically, I think politicians do need to be in there actively engaged.
Okay, thank you. Jamie Smith.
So, I said in my introduction that the accountability is simply lacking and it is causing the biggest rift in confidence in this current government that I've known in the 25 years I've been on the island, certainly. We need to have the experts in those contracts in place up front, and it is also partly a PR exercise. Yes, there are unknowns on the prom, but that was presumably because there wasn't sufficient surveying done, and if they knew that there were lots of unknowns, then they should have been honest with the residents and the shop owners on that front that it could take a long time. As far as the, I'm fully in supportive of a living wage, not a minimum wage. I've had lots of conversations with Neil Mellon at the food bank. I think we'll probably always have a need, a small need for a food bank, because some people often have very short-term, perhaps a relationship broken up, so they've got less income coming in, and that's always the week that your car breaks down. And that was always the intention of the food bank, is just to cover those short-term, and you hopefully never see those people again. What the food bank is seeing is the same people coming back and back because they're really, really struggling. And so we do have to sort that out.
I think what Jamie's said really well there is that we do need to move from a minimum wage to a living wage. If you're earning £3 under the living wage per hour, week on week, you're 120, 130 pounds down on being able to survive as a family. And at that point there, everybody struggles. There's less money going around the economy, and then you're relying on charity instead of being able to work your way out of poverty. And I think we need to really need to combat that.
Andrew Smith.
My belief is that if you put yourself forward as an MHK or a civil servant, then due diligence and accountability is all automatically acceptable. You should not be in a government situation and say you need to be accountable, because that's what you do when you sign up. Regarding the overspends, the word on the doorstep is everybody is sick to the back teeth of hearing all these overruns on the promenade and then the Liverpool landing stage, when all we've spent, and we've got a derelict piece of land. And they're sick to the back teeth of lack of information coming back from government. And if you needed to actually spend more, then consult the people first, because whose money is it? It's the taxpayers' money. Regarding food banks and fuel poverty, wearing my social hat through the charity that I work for, the food bank and the people reliant on subsidies for gas, oil and electricity top-ups has grown dramatically over the last 5 years. And just as was mentioned by previously, they are returners on a regular basis because they cannot continue to find the money for the increase in fuel costs. So I therefore believe that the cohesion, the fabric of society seems to become fragmented. For an island of only 87,000 people, it should be utopia. And we're scratching about trying to sort out all these issues, and whoever is elected, some people say, well, I don't know why you're looking to do it, because there's a perfect storm brewing on the horizon. And I say, well, I'm passionate about it because I want to see a difference. And I think that the current government have got a lot of accountability and they've got a lot to answer for.
Thank you. Daphne Kane.
Thank you. Well, I agree with the points made. I think the key points on the overspend, particularly on the promenade, it's been recognised. The government commissioned a Beeman's study of the Department of Infrastructure to establish what was going wrong. The Beeman's management report came back and said the Department of Infrastructure lacks competency in project management skills and managers generally. The issue I have with it is that in the budget of February this year, Treasury promised us a capital projects unit that would have that relevant recent engineering expertise to go within the unit and then have governance accountability over all forthcoming major capital schemes. Now, if that major capital projects unit is going to be within Treasury or Cabinet Office, perhaps the Isle of Man might see, or maybe the Isle of Man government would get some credibility back. But if it is going over to the Department of Infrastructure again, I'm not sure. So to answer your question, I think the government has lost all its credibility in terms of delivering major projects. The Liverpool landing stage or sea terminal, the costs are not even finite. They're north of £50 million and likely to increase. And we definitely, because of the social issues and poverty that there is genuinely on the island, we need that money to go into the social services. And particularly going back to the 2018 social attitudes survey, it was deeper than the amount of people on benefits and accessing the food bank. 32.5% of people indicated that they had 3 or more of the poverty indicators that they were struggling with in their daily lives. So I think it does need to be recognised. The Poverty Committee that had the report, if only we acted on some of these reports, and yes, we have got the link between the minimum wage, that it should move over the next 3 years rather than 5 years to align with the living wage. We need also to make benefits realistic level that don't put people into poverty either because they're going on benefits or because they have a disability in amongst a member of that household.
Do you think you mentioned a potential capital projects unit within government. Do you find it frustrating that to cover for the failings of previous public servants, you employ more public servants to do the job that they haven't done? Martin Perkins?
Well, that's exactly what's happened with the health service, isn't it? Manx Care is another layer of bureaucracy that's been put in. But just picking up Daphne's point earlier, I feel that the public should actually have more of a say. So when we're coming up to the budget, we should be asking the public, what do you want? Do you place priority on the roads, on health? This is how much we're spending now. What should we focus our spending on? So they feel they're back in control again. The problem with the budget is it's an all or nothing deal. And when it comes to Tynwald, you either vote for it or you don't. Now, again, I feel that needs to be looked at because there are various things that we all agree that we should do. There's nice to haves and there's other stuff that is sort of peripheral. And I think it's vitally important that we get that right and we get public engagement with that.
What we really need is to have priority-based budgeting. Yeah. So we set the programme for government and then we align the budget that's going to be needed to deliver that. And that sets the priorities, whether it's health, which we require as much as infrastructure and education. And it needs to be across all the fabric of societies because, as I said already, the inequalities in society are the thing that will undo this utopia, this wonderful place to live and work that the Isle of Man has become and hopefully will be again in the future.
Okay, but the thing is, Richard, that it's all right, you set the budget, but you've got to stick to the budget. It's not anybody can set a budget, but someone has to take responsibility and stick to it. And if there's an overrun, then somebody needs to be accountable. And I'll tell you now, I've never seen so much apathy out there because people say, well, it doesn't matter what we say. We never consulted. They come for a vote every 5 years. We never see them in between times, and they're not bothered. They're not interested as other people. Well, as a community, we need it to be integrated with that community, get feedback, and as Martin suggests, for various things, get budgets especially. If we need to get feedback, get feedback. Whose money is it? And I repeat myself, whose money are we spending? It's your money, it's my money, and it's money that some people cannot afford. So we've got to be realistic.
It's spent as if it's not real money, though, isn't it? That's the problem. So I don't see any reason why a capital projects team should mean an increase in headcount. I think there's the expertise around in the departments. I think the departments are protecting their little empires and very siloed mentality. So I think you should be taking project managers and legal people out from their departments, and the capital projects team should have zero increase in headcount, but be the experts in one place. So if you and I are in the education department and we want to build a new primary school, we go to Treasury, we justify it, we get a sign-off from Treasury to spend the money, we then go to this projects team and say, you're the experts in writing the watertight contracts, you're the experts in being clerks of works doing the building, basically you build it for us, give us the keys when it's built.
There's hopefully a quicker way to get primary schools built though, and that's the Manx Development Corporation. So that's been now established by the government.
But that's another example of more people being employed to cover the
But that should be able to deliver a build on brownfield sites quicker than allowing government to do it. And as we saw, I think with the sheltered accommodation, the nursing home, it was quicker built and Salisbury Street for government to purchase it as a done deal, as a completed project, than it would have been for government to build it itself.
If it's efficient, that's absolutely fine for that.
Yeah. Gareth Young?
I'm just worried with these kinds of things, like you say, we are increasing the headcount of numbers of employees to do the job that the departments should already be doing. And what is then the department actually responsible for afterwards? I think we need to look at that like really quite closely and actually make sure that they're doing their jobs properly in order to then deliver the services that we do need. So if we've got 2 different building corporations being set up, essentially to work for government, they need to then deliver on that as well.
Thank you. I need to move on tonight. We have quite a few questions from the audience. And we have a question from Joanne Clegg.
The average house price is £313,000, and I would like to ask the candidates what they would suggest in a practical way to help first-time buyers.
Thank you. And that question first to Daphne Kane.
Thank you. I think there definitely needs to be some intervention. Government belatedly announced a review of the levels, the amount you can earn and the price for a first-time buyer's house. But I think what's key is we're losing key workers because police, for instance, there's a recruitment retention problem of trained probationary constables. I think the time has come when a housing allowance needs to be built in for young teachers, young health workers and police officers in particular. I think on the basis of the students, for instance, returning to the Isle of Man, which is what we want them to do, with potentially student debt of £10,000 or more, you know, the ability to put together a deposit is beyond their reach. And I think another thing that the government should look at is possibly a deposit guarantee scheme to assist them if they are able to get a 95% mortgage to reach that deposit more quickly with a guarantee from government, amongst other things.
Thank you. Gareth Young.
So from my perspective, there's a series of things that need to realistically happen. We need to kind of end the complete offshore speculation in the housing market. So currently there is large corporations in the UK and banking sector in the UK that will quite happily purchase properties on the Isle of Man without even looking at them, rent them out for 6 to 12 months and then sell them on at a profit, which drives up house prices artificially and stops our young people from actually being able to get onto the housing market themselves. There's also then different types of schemes that the government could involve. So like a government-backed bond scheme, or like changing the brackets that you would need for an affordable first-time house, but also then building more affordable houses and not having houses built for profit out of private companies, but actually built so that people can afford to buy them. And if you look at the average kind of build price of your 3-bedroomed terrace or semi-detached, you're only looking at build prices of £130,000. Some of those houses are then being sold at £350,000 by private companies in just a profit-making exercise at that point. And they're no longer affordable for people. They are just pricing people out of the market. And we need to obviously intervene quite drastically to stop that from happening.
Thank you. Andrew Smith.
Yeah, I agree with Gareth regarding the companies that buy that are not on the Isle of Man. And I believe that if we had a higher rate of income tax for their earnings, that would be a dissuasion them from doing that. I also think that the sharp practice of some of the construction companies over here is deplorable. When young people have set their hearts on a house, and then they are offered the deposit back because the price has gone up, and then they sell it. So it's a type of gazumping by the construction people. I think the government should have a new loan scheme for first-time buyers, which is realistic in today's prices. And I think there should also be certain types of housing associations which can own properties for rental, cheaper rentals to help younger people to get that rent and also save for a deposit for a house. In addition to that, I also believe that we could, as a government, put a cap on certain properties within an estate. If a construction company decides that they're going to build 50 properties and there's a percentage set aside for first-time buyers, then on that percentage there could be a cap. And the cap could be whatever figure is decided on the day that's affordable by the first-time buyers. And that cap will be paid for by the landowner, partly by the landowner and partly by the construction company, because the amount that the profit that they make on the rest of the estate is mind-blowing.
Do you find it interesting that while you talk about restrictions, at the same time it's a business line for many Isle of Man companies, and the Isle of Man government actively markets the fact that you can invest in property in the Isle of Man without restriction and without stamp duty?
Yeah, well, that may be the case now, and it may be a hard pill to swallow. It may be a hard pill to swallow for new administration, but what do we say? Encourage offshore companies because of the tax benefit and deplete the housing stock that's available for our first-time buyers. We're talking about young people, the young people of our folk here. I mean, how can you possibly have an offshore company decide of that over our own young people? It's ludicrous.
That's the current situation. Martin Perkins, what would you do?
Thank you. I think the only way you're going to solve this is by actually having owner occupation. So when you buy a house, you actually have to live in it. Because as everybody else has said, there are a lot of foreign companies off island buying up loads of houses, buy to let, and people are forced to rent these places at enormous rents, and it prohibits them from saving for a deposit for a house. In addition to that, we need estate agents to be bona fide and not gazump people. We've got a number of cases where youngsters have saved up, agreed a sale to buy the house, gone off and done a survey on the house, spent £400 or £500 having a survey, only to come back to the estate agent that says, actually, sorry, we've had another offer of 10 grand more and we're selling it to them. And these sharp practices have to be addressed in the next administration.
Thank you. Jamie Smith?
I'll claim this topic on the basis that I brought it up in my introduction. There's some very sensible things being said. Mrs. Kane is correct that junior workers, particularly, I've been talking a lot of nurses who feel that after the pandemic they feel now let down, that they still can't get onto the housing ladder. I don't think a housing supplement in their income is enough because the house prices are just simply too high. We can't artificially change the house prices, but we can affect the supply, which is where my housing association idea comes in. I do agree that if you're off island and you're buying, then you should be expected to prove that you intend to move into it. So much like Mr. Perkins' idea, within perhaps 3 to 6 months. When I came to the island in '98, I had a job offer. I could have proven that I was going to move into the house that I bought. I'd be quite happy to increase the tax on rental income for off-island landlords, because that's money that's just lost straight away. But at the central tenet of my approach to the affordable housing is the creation of an Isle of Man housing association, not for profit. It enables, if you can only afford to buy 25% of a house, you only have to put down 25% of the deposit. The rest you rent. The government is the landlord, so the rent can be capped. Then there's the idea of staircasing, that you can buy another 10% in a few years' time if you can afford that, and you buy, and eventually the ultimate is hopefully you will own the whole house. But if you only own 50% of it at the end of your days, and you still have half a house that you pass down to the next generation.
I think the housing association idea is a really strong one, but I think we've thrown around a lot. It's these off-island investors who are snapping up the Isle of Man houses. But actually, I think with rock-bottom interest rates, a lot of those second purchasers are Isle of Man people as a means of retaining income. And I think the other thing is the registry is already, the land registry has increased the amount of tax paid on land registry fees on the purchase of second properties already. So additional properties, you're paying more fees. Maybe they need to increase more. And also, I think talking with estate agents, that the off-island demand remains steady at about 10%. So I think the other fundamental thing is we just need more housing, because they are becoming, with the current bottleneck post-COVID, artificially inflated prices. The
association would be expected to use the rental that it gets, with government would be controlling the policy, so they can control what size houses you need. And it isn't just young people, there's also older people who aren't able to downsize because there's just nothing affordable. It's the same price for a small house as the big one, so they're staying in a big family house, which is therefore removing the supply for the families who wanted to move into that big one. And can I also back up Andrew's point about the sharp practices? Another sharp practice I'm hearing is where they want you to complete within 30 days, which means if you're a young couple, perhaps got a young babe, you're in a flat, you want to move to a house, you can't do it because you can't guarantee you'll be able to sell your flat within 30 days. It's terrible.
Okay, thanks very much. I just want to move on to another topic, and I believe we have another question from the audience.
Okay, this is quite personal. I just want to know what the candidates are considering along the lines of bringing a bill for assisted dying. My father passed away on Saturday, and he's had a bit of a tough time, and I wonder whether, pardon me, if this was something that was available, he might have considered it.
Thank you for your question, and we're very sorry for your loss. Obviously a very sensitive subject. Martin Perkins?
It is a very sensitive subject, and I must admit that I am for assisted dying. I think we need a very big discussion on this in the next administration. It's a bit like a hot potato, like the abortion issue was in the last administration, but it urgently needs addressing. There are a number of people with motor neuron disease and other debilitating diseases that they know there is absolutely no way out, and they are absolutely adamant that they wish to die in a good family environment. And it has to have very, very careful checks and balances, but we should, I'm definitely for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Jamie Smith?
Condolences to you and your family, obviously. Possibly my best friend on the island, who knew that I was thinking of standing in 2021, was very supportive, and he was diagnosed and has passed away with motor neuron disease, and it was really horrible, and I'm 100% in favour of an assisted dying policy.
Thank you. Gareth Young?
Again, many condolences for the loss. I can quite happily say that I'm 100% behind having a discussion and putting forward a bill on assisted dying. I've watched multiple family members go through quite extended periods before they've passed away, be it via Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, and it is absolutely heartbreaking. And I know for myself that I wouldn't want to have that extended period, and I'd want to be able to go out on my own terms. And I think that's massively important for people to be able to do, where they can go out with dignity rather than just waiting for something to take them. So I'm 100% behind it.
Thank you. Daphne Kane?
Thank you. I've also had a very dear colleague diagnosed with motor neuron disease who's no longer with us, and watched my father die from pancreatic cancer. And I'm 100% behind the Isle of Man needs to be consulted firstly on this important law change, and I'm finding amongst the public that I've spoken to only support as long as it's done for people with a terminal illness within 6 months of expected death. And also I think according to the research, a third of people who opt for assisted dying pathway don't take it up because they find other healthcare support. But it's having that security blanket that you can say your goodbyes and have death with dignity rather than the awful struggle and hardship of final hours of some of these debilitating diseases. I'm sensing, I think there was a recent survey done by a Channel Island company that said of the 700 people they surveyed, there was overwhelming support on the Isle of Man for that legislation. I think we need to have a wider consultation, but I think that it will hopefully be something that can be brought forward in the next administration.
Thank you. Andrew Smith?
Thank you. Yeah, again, condolences from myself to you and your family. A very difficult time, and I understand that. And such a subject is so intimate to the family, because obviously you understand your loved one, and obviously it's a very, very delicate balance between when you feel the time is right for that particular action to take place. I would support that, and I think government, as everyone else has said, need to seriously grasp the nettle here and decide how we can help through legislation. But again, I believe that the onus really, as long as the legislation is in place, the onus has to be with the family, because it's their loved one. And we should not get into a situation as a state to be dictating when things, and obviously the medical staff will assist as to when that actual physical event takes place. So I fully support it, and I understand exactly what you went through. I lost my mother recently during COVID, and I had not been able to see her for 18 months, and she'd been lying in a nursing home for 2.5 years. And obviously it's a difficult thing, and even more so when you're remote. So I can understand your situation, and I would fully support it.
Thank you. Just obviously with respect to the subject, do we need to avoid the possibility of people coming to the island from other parts of the British Isles to opt to spend their final days here, or sort of, to put it very bluntly, a death tourism?
I think you have to be resident for at least 3 years before anything can be considered like that. Otherwise, we would become deaf tourist island.
Okay, so
I think it's also in discussion across the UK, so I think it's something that might be developed and introduced in the same sort of timescale, because I think there's more and more people demanding the right to choose.
thank you.
It's getting much more traction, like across in the UK these days, and like Daphne's just said, like realistically, the legislation looks like it's going to be similar timescale. So at that point there, it's not like we'd be attracting people to come for tourism for death.
Okay, thanks. Do we have a... Sorry, sir.
I was just going to say, do we know why it hasn't moved forward in this current administration?
I think one of the problems is that there's been so much legislation. I had the same problem with the organ donating bill, and it would have to be presumably it would have to be a private member's bill, like the organ donating bill was, and the legislators, the draftsmen, were so tied up with everything that was going on that it took a long time to get through. But that is why there was various things that weren't addressed. I would have loved to have addressed it in the last administration, but just couldn't get round to it.
Yeah, I had it on my previous manifesto that I would be in support, but I think that I brought 2 smallish private members' bill, including no-fault divorce, and the legislative time that you take away from the government programme. Chief Minister has criticised us in the past for taking that time, and also we had unprecedented amount of legislation and regulations to bring out for the health pandemic and then Brexit. So hopefully there would be more time in the next administration.
Thank you.
The COVID does take priority, but it's not up to the Chief Minister to dictate what you as a private individual or as an independent should be bringing to the table, really.
It's just fighting for the actual availability of the draftspeople, and there literally was so much. And actually, our office, we put forward 5 private members' bill, which is quite a record for legislation. We managed to. Alex did the abortion bill. Daphne did the divorce, no-fault divorce, and the removal of the Chief Minister.
No, the Council of Ministers voted no confidence.
Voted no confidence, yeah. And I did the Sky Lanterns bill and also the organ donating bill. But that also included the human tissue bill, which needed to be the human tissue regulations needed to be updated. And when you're fighting against all the other stuff, these guys have got a list as long as your arm when in the middle of the administration with COVID and all the rest of it. We're lucky to get that through as it was. But you're right, we should make sure we earmark enough private members' capacity in the draftspeople to enable us to do that.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
This is a national election, but it's also to a great extent a local election, as the main role of an MHK is to assist the people of your constituency in solving the issues that face them. So I would ask the candidates, what contribution have each of you made to directly assist the people of Garff?
Jamie Smith.
So I've been a Garff Commissioner for 4 years, Chairman 2019 to 2020, and we had one major planning application in front of us. It was the sewage works down at Laxey Harbour. There was an absence of any planning application for sewage works to cope with Baldrine and Garwick, and in the run-up to the decision on this, I went round the commissioners, and there was 2 who were absolutely definitely happy and were not going to object to the application. There was 4 or 5 sitting on the fence at that time, and there was 2, possibly 3, who really felt that Manx Utilities hadn't proven to us that it was the right site. So I worked in the background and convinced them that even though it might end up being a similar project, they hadn't convinced us that they looked at other sites, and the final score of the 9 commissioners was 8 opposing and 1 abstaining, and indeed the planning committee followed suit.
Thank you. Andrew Smith.
I think it's important that obviously the local commissioners have this input, and sadly sometimes they seem to be overlooked as you know, representative of the community. And again, I think that comes sometimes to the this fragmented society where there's been apathy in the voting. People don't believe that a commissioner's capacity is worth it anymore. So I think that, that's what we need to address, so that people realise that your commissioners are your local representatives and they have a say on any planning issues, and they are the feet on the ground in that particular area. They've got the knowledge and the know-how, and therefore central government should listen to them, the MHK should listen to them, and if necessary, the MHK should support them if that's what if they're of agreement. And that's the only way that you can manage sometimes to convince the powers that be, even though we may be part of those powers if we're duly elected, to understand the issues of things. So I think they're very important. And from my time on the commissioners, I always made that point, and I'd like to see it return to its former glory, the local commissioners.
Well said, Andrew.
Thank you. Daphne Kane.
Thank you. I was very supportive of the planning application, both attending the Commissioners' meeting when it was discussed and also supporting the Best for Laxey group attending the planning committee with all the representations that were given to the committee that reached that decision. And I do salute the Manx Utilities for not taking it to appeal and listening to the community. And now I'm pleased that as an MHK, as Jamie and for the Commissioners, we attend the Garff the regional treatment sewage consultative group that the Manx Utilities has set up. We continue to feed in that, representing constituents' views. But on a wider level, yes, I think the planning system needs completely rebooting, reforming in certain ways, and local authority input should have more weight in terms of the final decision than it currently does, let alone, don't get me started on the appeal decision. But many of the constituents' issues that I've responded to over the previous 5 years. They are numerous, but there are many that is no win situations over planning, inconsistencies of planning. Really, they come to us when there's been a lack of action by government. So for everything from potholes, not emptying the gullies of certain roads, not resurfacing, not able to get on GPs or healthcare that's required, or dentists, all sorts of things where government's fallen down really, and that's when I've had a very busy caseload, and I hope my track record will stand me in good stead for what we've done across everybody from Onchan to Maccled and everything in between. It's not just been about the sewage works, it's that, people's issues are many and varied.
Thank you.
Lots of local flooding issues.
Gareth, yeah?
So to return back to the original question as to what we've done to help the people of Garff, I myself am a teacher, and quite happily I have taught at St Ninians for the past 6 years. So I've taught a generation of people, and I have tried to help mould them into a good generation of people who want to go out there, who want to make a difference for the world, and try to do that education side of things. In terms of getting involved with the local community aspects, I've been involved with rugby training and helping get people into sports, and then at the same time as that, just standing up and being counted. So for example, when the last set of floods happened, I've dug out people's homes. I've dug out the pub, like the Shore Hotel, that was completely flooded on 3 different occasions. And I'm the type of person that would quite happily get involved and actually get my hands dirty in order to help the people out that needs help at the time.
That was a relative, I think you should say.
It was, yeah. It wasn't at the other places, though.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, thank
More
you.
than one place.
Thanks.
Yeah, I understand the question is, what have we done to help our constituents during the last, not just the Laxey sewage scheme, but other things as well. As Daphne says, you point the constituents in the right direction when they come up against government. Unfortunately, there's a sort of misnomer out there that MHKs can get you a house. We can't, but we can point you in the right direction. We can help you fill out forms and make sure you've got the maximum points to get your housing. Medical problems, we can point you in the right direction to try and get that, but we can't wave a magic wand. So all MHKs do that. In addition to that, during COVID, one of the things I found was that Laxey Lifeline was absolutely brilliant, and it worked very, very well for Laxey, but Onchan was sadly lacking. They had sort of some schemes, but there was no total scheme that embraced everybody in Onchan. So what I did was I identified various roads, and I selected 4 telephone numbers that represented each part of the road, and I rung those people up and said, how are you getting on in COVID? And from that, I identified 7 or 8 elderly people that had just completely missed out on everything. They didn't listen to Manx radio because they didn't like the music. They didn't buy the Manx newspapers because it was over £1 a pop. And they just got all their news from the BBC. And consequently, a number of them hadn't been contacted by their local GP and they weren't going to have the jabs. So by making sure, ringing round people, we identified several elderly people that hadn't had the jabs that were able to go out and have them. And of course, the other thing was with COVID, initially, we had constituents that had died, an elderly couple, one had died, and the relatives wanted to come over. And it was a case of holding their hand because obviously they could not come over in the middle of COVID and they needed that support. And I don't know whether Daphne found it, but numerous phone calls from people with depressive problems resulting from COVID. So you're almost like counselling and trying to help people in that method. Going back to Laxey sewage scheme, I feel that we need to G up the Manx utilities and get them organised because the process has been started, but we seem to have stalled. We're not going anywhere, and we need to really get behind them. And the flooding, I said at the outset, the only way you're going to solve the flooding is by getting one phone number, i.e. one person, the flood czar, who was responsible for it, because it was across 3 or 4 different Manx utilities, DOI, DEFA, were all sort of responsible and dabbling in it, whereas we needed one area or one group of people that could have the clout to sort these things out. And that is actually what we've done. We've got the flood team that you can ring at any time. They actually now will text you if there's going to be a flood. And they are responsible for all the walls that are going up along the Laxey River at the moment, the tree catcher that's in the river, and all the other good things that have happened within and around Laxey. They have instigated it, and I think that was quite an important achievement as well. Thank you.
We're still building on the hillsides, and the floodwater is coming down, inundating the gullies. I think the river is nearly sorted. The seawall may well get sorted, but the water coming off, the surface water coming off the hillsides throughout Garff,
Back to planning.
is a real problem.
Back to planning, and also good structure.
Okay, thank you. I just want to get a question from the gentleman with the light blue sweater, please. Thank you.
My dilemma as a voter is that you're all sitting there in front of me as constituency MHK's perspective. I want to feel that my thoughts are going to be represented by you in Tynwald when you sit on those leather seats. I want to wade back into the sewage problem that occurs in Laxey Bay. I represent a group of about 800 people, best for Laxey, and I want to know that that group is going to be listened to, and the aims and objectives of that group is going to be followed through by you within Tynwald. Will you support the pump option for sewage not appearing in Laxey Bay? It's either a yes or a no, and I want to know before I give my vote that you will be supporting that option. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Gareth Young.
Well, as you already know, I'm actually involved with the Best for Laxey group, and I've always been involved and keeping an eye on things because it was a direct concern of mine, and I can 100% say that I am behind the pump away option and not having any raw sewage of any description go into Laxey Bay. There is no way that I would want my children to be able to go into the Laxey Bay, which they want to do, with it as it currently is, and we need to pump the sewage away so that it's treated properly and that we don't have that sewage option going into the sea.
Thank you. Andrew Smith.
Obviously, I'm fully for it. I'm a member of the group. I was down on the Cairn 3 days ago, taking my own water samples. I've taken those water samples to be tested, and I'm currently awaiting the results. I've got a team now working on regular water sampling from behind the breakwater by the sewer and in the centre by the currently where the raft is. At my own cost, these water samples will be continually tested and monitored. I want that sewerage system to be sorted sooner than later. The flap that should be on the end of the pipe has disappeared. I've sent an email to Manx Utilities. I'm not part of this group because I'm not inside yet, hopefully, next time. Asking for them urgently to get the flat back on so that at least the sewage is controlled by tides as it should be, as you understand. When the flood tide's in, okay, flows south. When the ebb tide's out, goes north, etc. So therefore, it's really safe. It should be safe. I would suggest that people wanting to use Laxey Beach, especially swimmers, should do it on the incoming tide, which is common sense for swimmers anyway in the sea. Not that we suffer from rip tides here, but that's common sense, because that's the way the sewage is flowing. And obviously, when they do swim on the incoming tide, sadly, the Garwick sewage can often come into the bay. So I don't know what else I need to demonstrate to you that I'm fully supportive of the sewage. Do you know, I mentioned at the outset when I first started on the commissioners, and do you know we started talking about primary screening in 1993? And where am I today? 2001. And we're still in a situation where not only have we not got primary screening, but we've got 24/7 sewage flowing out into the sea. Additional houses, as Jamie said, since all that building in Laxey, all flushing and forgetting. And I'm telling you, those samples that I took are not a pretty sight. But hopefully the test results will come back, and I will happily share them with you. You've got all my information and anybody else that wants it. So I am fully supportive of best for Laxey. Pump, not dump.
Thank you. Martin Perkins.
Thank you. I don't know why you bothered taking the sample, because we all know that it is contaminated with sewage. And
Show me then. Where is it?
well, you can see it if you go down the beach. You can see it washing in.
Yeah, you can see it, but I want written proof, because nobody will believe it otherwise.
Of course,
As with the flood, nobody believes it's going to happen until you give a written proof.
Well, you can see the sewage washing up on the beach. In answer to your question, yes, I want the best option for Laxey as well. Your 800 people in your Facebook account, when I ask them on the door, they are members of it because they want to find out what your views are and what's happening. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to vote against an MHK who does not support that particular option. I'm for the best option. Now, whether it's pumping through to Miriveg or whether it's treatment with IRCBs, we want the best option. Now, I understand your group says that you will not have any discharge into Laxey Bay. Is that correct?
Yes.
It is. So you're not going to allow any option of any treated discharge at all?
It's quite clear, Martin. You pump it away eventually to Miriveg via Onken.
Right. Well, I would say
no discharge into the bay.
No discharge whatsoever? Not even a treated discharge?
Well, it would be treated at Miriveg.
Right, so what I'm saying is your group will not allow any discharge whatsoever. Everything's got to be pumped.
Correct.
Right, now we've established that. To me, quite frankly, if we decide that we need to pump it through to Miriveg, we're going to have to go back to Tynwald to get the cost to extra money to be able to do that, because was it 2006, 2007, it was decided that regional treatment was going to be the way forward. Now, unfortunately, Peel, Laxey and Baldrine got left behind. Now, realistically, if we're going to pump it through to Miriveg, it's going to cost an awful lot of money on electricity, and the infrastructure is going to be phenomenal. And one thing I will fight for is that we don't want Glen Road dug up again. Those people have been through the mill, and the last thing they want is a high-pressure pipe put right up through the middle of Glen Road. Now, hopefully, the MU are looking at various sites to see what they can do. And I feel that if it is treated properly and a close eye is kept on the effluent, which it is done nowadays with the modern technology, we should actually look at treating it and putting the effluent from it, which is very clean. You can get various reports, and I understand you've got a report somewhere that says it's not clean. The MU have got a report that says it is clean, so we have to make a judgment on that. But all I can say is the people of Laxey want clean water in the beach. And however they do it, they're not particularly worried. They just want clean water, and they want it as soon as possible.
OK, thank you. Jamie Smith.
I think my credentials with the Best for Laxey group are immaculate. I was there, not just a member, but I was there when we even discussed the name, Best for Laxey Bay, and various other scenarios. It was at the Laxey Sailing Club. I was there as a commissioner, and so I had to be a bit careful, so I effectively was an observer officially. But I was totally with you that we want the best solution. And I also agree that my preferred solution is pumping to Mary Veg and no discharge of any sort, except for possibly in extreme storm scenarios, no discharge into the Laxey Bay from either Garwick or Laxey. But I do need to give you a word of caution, and I have said this in previous TV interviews, that even if I became an MHK, I'd be one of only 2 MHKs and 22 non-Garff, 2 Garff MHKs compared to 22, and the pumping to Mary Veg, we are being told, will be expensive. So I will fight for that, but at the end of the day, overall, the best solution, including what Treasury allow, might be treated in Garff, and the water, which they say is probably drinkable, discharged into the sea. We might have to accept that. I won't ever promise that I can get it pumped to Mary Veg.
Thank you. And Daphne Kane.
Thank you. I'm 100% behind Best for Laxey. I've been completely convinced that the best option, both for Laxey and the whole island, is to pump away via Onchan to Mary Veg. And the reasons for that are because the Cairn site is completely inappropriate in the middle of a conservation area, and with the topography of steep-sided valley, to put first the IRBC. Firstly, I said, why don't they cover it mimicking the style of the pipe factory, and the response was it would dwarf it. And if that is the size of the installation they're looking at, it should not go anywhere near there, let alone an additional bridge that's needed and the daily wagon pumping away the remaining solids, which they can't guarantee wouldn't have an odour issue. So we would be solving the problem of pumping raw sewage out to the sea by spoiling the very tourist amenity that we're trying to enhance.
But that's been outlawed anyway.
But it has. We would have to change the regional treatment of sewage strategy that Tynwald has supported. But I think it comes down to the balancing sustainability, the environment, the biosphere, the tourist amenity against the ongoing cost. And if we're talking that there is a cost of pumping because it's electricity, well, we're talking by 2035 of having renewable energy anyway. So surely that's got to be better than a diesel.
Because you've also got to build, because pumps sometimes need repair, so you need to have a holding tank so that it can...
There would always be a holding tank.
Up the hill, you need them at different stages up the hill. I'm not arguing against pumping, I'm just saying there are some engineering issues. You wouldn't go up the Glen Road, it would almost certainly go other routes.
Yeah.
Also, we're being told that they no longer would need that daily truck because they would dry it to a pellet form and could probably get away with once a week.
That can be managed now, and that wasn't an option previously. Now they're saying they can sink it further into the ground. But how much is that costing?
They got a punch on the nose from all of us to go back and look at things they could do, and they're already doing that. I still prefer pump to Mary Veg, but they are now saying this is what they can, the mitigation, if it does have to be treated in the area.
Why should Laxey be a second-class citizen over the emission, the effluent going into the sea?
It shouldn't be.
So we should demand it goes. And if you see the beaches at Port Erin and Port St Mary, that's what Laxey should be like. We don't want to get in the situation like Peel. I would like Laxey to come to a decision over the best for Laxey solution sooner rather than later. But yes, why are they not already doing what the provision, which is going to be first stage screening?
Thank you, everyone. I can see this is inspiring some very passionate debate, which I'm sure will carry on over the next few weeks. But thank you, panel, for your answers this evening. That wraps up our questions. And all that remains now is for each candidate to give us their final few words on why they should get your vote. And we start off with Gareth Young. Thank you, Gareth.
Thanks, Richard. So we've talked about a range of issues this evening, from the need for an adequate sewage solution to the need for affordable housing. What I can quite happily say to anybody out there is that if you vote for me, you are voting for somebody who will give you a voice in Tynwald, and somebody who will fight every single step of the way to make sure that you get the best that Garff needs and that the island needs to make progress for the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Gareth. Jamie Smith.
So it's going to be a very difficult 5 years with some really difficult decisions. There's funding crisis coming up. We need to diversify the economy. But underlying it is I want to see those government decision makers held accountable for the decisions they make. I feel I am the candidate who will work alongside the residents of Garff to make sure those decisions are well made.
Thank you, Jamie. Andrew Smith.
Well, I believe that I've got a strong record so far, especially in the local area. I've done as much as I can regarding flooding, and I continue to do that on a daily basis. I'm totally committed to the sewage in Laxey Bay. I'm passionate about, so obviously that's Garff-centric. I'm passionate about the island. I always have been. I promoted the Island Man abroad, convincing people to bring the business here, convincing people to live here. And I will tell you that a leopard doesn't change its spots. What I am is what you'll get. What I tell you is true, and I will stand up and fight for every possible cause within the Garff constituency and the Isle of Man to bring it back to where it was, to prosperity, to be a place of welcome, and to be a happy place for all the residents that are working hard to bring up their families here.
Thank you, Andrew. Martin Perkins.
Thank you. In the last administration, we had a lot of things to deal with that no other administration has had to deal with before. We had Brexit. We had the climate emergency. We had the Laxey flood locally. We had beneficial ownership. And we had COVID. All that lot has been a pretty big deal for this government to deal with. Going forward, we need to address the economy. We need to get that back on its feet. We need to invest in health and education. And we need to sort out the housing crisis. In addition to that, we've spoken tonight about the assisted dying legislation that needs to be put into place, and also cannabis needs to be discussed very carefully as well. With that in mind, I've had the experience over the last 5 years to take things forward, and if you give your trust in me, I will make sure it's carried out to the letter. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And finally, Daphne Kane.
Thank you. What can I say? I came to the Isle of Man over 30 years ago. My whole life is here. I have 2 teenage children, and I want to make the Isle of Man a better place for them to want to stay here, to have the best career they could possibly have. And I want to have for their contemporaries and for the future generations. And in order to do that, I want to be re-elected to represent Garff for all the people of the constituency, but for the wider political ambitions as well. And that is to reduce the inequalities that we see across our society, to enable and ensure that there is affordable but sustainable housing for the Isle of Man for the future, to support those who are vulnerable and in need, and to celebrate and reward those who are able to bring business here, create jobs, and make the Isle of Man a vibrant place that we all want for the future. And in terms of achieving that, I think we have to look at the basics of infrastructure, of footpaths around the island. We need to celebrate what the Isle of Man has in abundance. We need to fund things like our heritage attractions, like the Laxey Wheel that isn't even going to turn, I don't think, for another whole year unless somebody gets their finger out and starts fixing it. So we have to celebrate the best that we've got, encourage and support those who are vulnerable, and address the inequalities and the housing issues, the fundamental infrastructure to make the Isle of Man a brilliant, vibrant place to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you again to all the candidates for coming along this evening. They are Daphne Kane, Martin Perkins, Andrew Smith, Jamie Smith, and Gareth Young. Now, it's over to you. Where will your votes be going on September the 23rd? Thank you and goodbye.